I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home in suburban Denver, watching my 7-year-old son Tyler bounce excitedly in his car seat. Snow dusted the familiar brick house where I'd grown up, and Christmas lights twinkled around the front porch. Tyler had been talking nonstop about seeing Grandma Margaret and opening presents under her enormous tree. Walking through the front door, we stepped into the living room, and my heart stopped. 36 perfectly wrapped presents sat piled high beneath the Douglas fir, each one tagged with careful handwriting for my sister Diana's 3 children. Tyler raced around the tree, searching behind furniture and checking every corner for gifts with his name. There were none. Not a single present for my son. Mom emerged from the kitchen holding her coffee mug, acting like everything was completely normal. When I asked about Tyler's Christmas gifts, she simply shrugged and said she forgot. The word "forgot" hung in the air like poison gas. I stared at my mother, searching her face for any hint of remorse or embarrassment. Instead, Margaret sipped her coffee and suggested Tyler could share with his cousins when they arrived. Share. As if my son was some kind of afterthought who should be grateful for leftover scraps of attention. Tyler tugged on my sleeve, his brown eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy, where are my presents from Santa? Did he forget our new address?" The innocence in his voice nearly broke me. I knelt down to his level, my hands trembling as I smoothed his dark hair. "We'll figure it out, buddy," I whispered, though I had no idea how to explain this cruelty to a 7-year-old. "I'm Chet Morrison, 32 years old, and I work as a software engineer for a tech company downtown. Tyler lives with me every other weekend since my divorce 2 years ago." I'd been looking forward to this Christmas morning for weeks, imagining Tyler's excitement as he opened gifts from his grandmother. Instead, I watched my son's face crumble as the reality sank in. Margaret walked past us toward the kitchen, completely unbothered by Tyler's obvious distress. "Diana should be here soon with the kids," she announced cheerfully. "I can't wait for them to see what Santa brought." 20 minutes later, my sister Diana burst through the front door with her 3 children in tow. Ashley, 9 years old, immediately spotted the mountain of presents and squealed with delight. 6-year-old Brandon and 4-year-old Caroline joined their sister in dancing around the tree, counting their gifts out loud. 36 presents, Ashley announced proudly. "That's 12 each?" Diana removed her designer coat and surveyed the scene with satisfaction. At 35, my sister had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. She worked as a real estate agent, always dressed perfectly, and had married Kevin, a successful accountant who worshipped the ground she walked on. "Mom outdid herself this year," Diana said, then glanced at Tyler standing quietly beside me. "Where are Tyler's gifts?" "I forgot to get anything for him," Margaret replied without a trace of shame. "You know how scattered I've been since Thanksgiving." Diana's expression shifted to something between pity and smugness. "Well, that's unfortunate. Maybe next year you should be more organized about these things, Chet. Did you even send Mom a list of what Tyler wanted?" My jaw clenched. I had sent an email 3 weeks ago with a detailed list of Tyler's interests. Train sets, art supplies, books about dinosaurs. Simple things that would have made him happy. "I sent you that list on December 3rd, I said to Margaret. "You replied saying you'd take care of everything." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "I don't remember getting any email. You probably sent it to my old address." That was a lie, and we both knew it. I'd sent it to the same email address she'd been using for 5 years. Tyler pressed closer to my side as Diana's children began tearing into their presents. The living room filled with shouts of joy and rustling wrapping paper. Remote control cars, expensive dolls, video games, art sets, jewelry, clothes, toys I'd never even heard of. Each gift more elaborate than the last. "Look what I got!" Brandon shouted, holding up a tablet computer that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Tyler watched silently, his small hands gripping my jacket. I could see him trying to understand why Santa had been so generous to his cousins while completely forgetting about him. "Diana," Margaret called from the kitchen, "come help me with the turkey. The kids can play with their new toys." As the noise and chaos swirled around us, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the corner near the window sat Margaret's antique writing desk, the same one where she'd always kept important papers when I was growing up. The surface was covered with receipts, and I could see the edge of a familiar red notebook peeking out from underneath. Walking over while everyone was distracted, I lifted the receipts and found Margaret's old Christmas planning book, the one she'd used every year of my childhood to organize gifts, meals, and decorations. My hands shook as I opened it to this year's pages. There, in her careful handwriting, were detailed lists for each of Diana's children. Pages of notes about their favorite colors, characters, activities, shopping lists with specific stores and price ranges, gift ideas crossed out and replaced with better options, weeks of planning and preparation. Then I flipped to the page marked Tyler. It was completely blank except for one line written in pencil and erased so thoroughly I could barely make out the words, "something small." Even that had been crossed out. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't scattered thinking or holiday stress. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty toward my son. Margaret had spent weeks planning the perfect Christmas for Diana's children, while intentionally excluding Tyler from every consideration. I closed the notebook and walked back to where Tyler stood watching his cousins play. The sight of his resigned acceptance, the way he'd already stopped hoping for his own presence, filled me with a rage I'd never experienced before. My mother hadn't forgotten. She'd chosen to break my son's heart on Christmas morning, and she'd done it on purpose. By 11 o'clock, the house had filled with extended family members arriving for Christmas dinner. Uncle Robert, my mother's younger brother, walked in carrying a plate of homemade cookies, followed by his wife Patricia with a casserole dish. Robert had always been the fair-minded one in the family, the person who called out nonsense when he saw it. "Where's Tyler's pile of presents?" Robert asked, immediately scanning the living room. "I don't see anything with his name on it." Margaret emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Chet doesn't believe in spoiling children with too many gifts. He prefers a more minimalist approach to Christmas." I felt my face burn. Another lie delivered with the same casual tone she might use to comment on the weather. Patricia knelt down to Tyler's level and smiled warmly. "What did Santa bring you this year, sweetie?" Tyler looked up at me uncertainly before whispering, "He forgot about me." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's expression darkened as he processed what he was seeing. Patricia's mouth fell open. Even Diana's children stopped playing with their new toys to stare at the adults. "Forgot?" Robert repeated slowly. "How does someone forget Christmas presents for their own grandson?" "These things happen," Margaret said with a shrug. "It's not the end of the world." Robert pulled me aside while Patricia distracted Tyler with questions about school. We stood near the front windows, speaking in low voices, while the rest of the family pretended not to listen. "Chet, I need to tell you something," Robert said quietly. "Your mother has been bad-mouthing you to anyone who'll listen for the past 6 months. She's been telling people you're an unfit father, that Tyler would be better off living with his mother full-time." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She called me in October, asking if I thought she should contact social services about your custody arrangement. Said Diana had concerns about Tyler's well-being when he stays with you." Robert's jaw tightened. "I told her she was way out of line, but she's been working on other family members too." I glanced across the room at Diana, who was helping her children set up a new board game. She caught my eye and smiled sweetly, the same smile she'd perfected in childhood when she was plotting something cruel. "Well, why would she do that?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Because she blames you for the divorce. She thinks you drove away Tyler's mother, and now you're damaging Tyler by being a single father." Robert shook his head in disgust. "She's convinced herself that Diana's family is the perfect model and yours is broken. 20 minutes later, my father Douglas finally emerged from his home office, where he'd been hiding since I arrived. At 60 years old, Dad had spent his entire marriage avoiding conflict with Margaret by retreating to his workshop, his office, or his garage, whenever tensions rose. He'd retired from the Postal Service 3 years ago, and now spent most of his time building model airplanes and pretending problems would solve themselves. "Morning, son," he said quietly, patting my shoulder. "How's work going?" I wanted to scream at him. "Your wife just humiliated my child in front of the entire family, and you want to talk about my job." But Douglas had perfected the art of willful blindness over the decades. He saw what he wanted to see and ignored everything else. Diana's husband Kevin arrived just before noon, stomping snow off his boots and complaining loudly about traffic. Kevin worked as a financial advisor and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how successful he was. He wore expensive suits to family gatherings and drove a BMW that he parked prominently in the driveway where neighbors would notice it. "Sorry I'm late," Kevin announced, loosening his tie. "Had to take a call from a client in California. Money never sleeps, you know." He surveyed the living room, taking in the scattered wrapping paper and Diana's children playing with their new toys. Then his gaze landed on Tyler, who was sitting quietly on the couch, reading a book I'd brought from home. "Where are Tyler's presents?" Kevin asked. "Don't tell me he opened everything already." "There weren't any presents for Tyler," Patricia said firmly before Margaret could spin another lie. Margaret apparently forgot to buy anything for him. Kevin's eyebrows shot up. "Forgot? How do you forget your own grandson?" He looked at me with what might have been sympathy. "That's rough, man. Kids remember stuff like that forever." "It's not a big deal," Diana interjected quickly. "Tyler can share with our kids. They got plenty of toys." "Share," Kevin repeated. "On Christmas morning, that's not how Christmas works, Diana. Every kid should have their own presents to open." I felt a flicker of hope that someone besides Robert and Patricia might actually stand up for Tyler. But Diana shot her husband a warning look, and Kevin immediately backed down. "Well, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation," he said weakly. As the morning dragged on, more details emerged that painted an even clearer picture of Margaret's deliberate favoritism. She'd been shopping for Diana's children since October, visiting multiple stores to find the perfect items. She'd wrapped each present with different colored paper and elaborate bows. She'd even created a treasure hunt for Ashley to find her biggest gift, a bicycle hidden in the garage. Meanwhile, Tyler sat on the couch reading his book, occasionally glancing at his cousins, but no longer showing any expectation that Christmas might include him. The resignation in his 7-year-old face was heartbreaking. During a quiet moment, I overheard Margaret talking on the phone in the kitchen. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to make my blood boil. "He's just like his mother," Margaret was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Entitled and demanding. Tyler isn't worth the investment anyway, not with those damaged genes from her side of the family." I gripped the door frame to steady myself. She was talking about my son, my 7-year-old boy, like he was some kind of failed investment, like his genetic heritage made him unworthy of basic grandparental love. Robert appeared beside me, having heard the same conversation. His face was flushed with anger. "That's it," he whispered. "I'm done watching this woman destroy family relationships with her toxic behavior." But before either of us could confront Margaret, Diana called everyone to gather for Christmas photos. She positioned her children prominently in front of the tree, surrounded by their mountain of gifts. Tyler was placed off to the side, barely visible in the frame. "Perfect," Margaret said, snapping pictures with her digital camera. "Diana, your family looks absolutely perfect, just like a Christmas card." The emphasis on "your family" was unmistakable. Tyler and I were clearly not included in her definition of family worth celebrating. As I watched my mother take dozens of photos that would completely erase my son's presence from this Christmas, I realized something had fundamentally shifted inside me. the little boy who'd always sought his mother's approval, who'd made excuses for her favoritism, and tried harder to earn her love, was finally gone. In his place stood a father who would no longer tolerate anyone treating his child as less than worthy of love and respect, even if that someone was his own mother. Christmas dinner brought the cruelty into even sharper focus. Margaret had set the dining room table with her finest china and crystal glasses, creating an elegant tablescape with gold chargers and burgundy napkins. Diana's children were assigned seats at the main table alongside the adults, their places marked with handwritten name cards in Margaret's best calligraphy. Tyler's place was at a folding card table she'd set up in the corner near the kitchen door, alone. "Tyler will be more comfortable over there," Margaret explained when I questioned the seating arrangement. "The main table is really set up for older children and adults." Brandon was only 6 years old, 1 year younger than Tyler, yet he sat proudly at the main table, while my son was relegated to eating by himself like some kind of punishment. "This is ridiculous," I said, moving to relocate Tyler to the main table. "Don't make a scene, Chet," Diana warned. "Mom worked hard on this dinner. The seating arrangement is fine." Kevin nodded in agreement. "Kids' tables are normal at family gatherings. I sat at the kids' table until I was 12. "This isn't a kids' table," Patricia pointed out sharply. "This is one child sitting alone while his cousins get to participate in family conversation." Douglas cleared his throat uncomfortably but said nothing. Robert looked like he was about to explode, but Margaret quickly diverted attention by bringing out the turkey on her best serving platter. As we passed dishes around the table, Diana launched into detailed descriptions of her children's achievements at their expensive private academy. Ashley was reading at a 5th grade level. Brandon had been selected for advanced mathematics. Caroline was already showing artistic talent in her preschool program. "We're so proud of how well they're doing," Diana said, cutting dainty bites of turkey. "Private education really makes such a difference in developing potential." Then she turned to me with false concern. "How is Tyler doing in his public school? I heard from Mom that he's been having some struggles." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Tyler wasn't having any struggles. He was doing perfectly fine in 2nd grade reading above grade level and excelling in art class. But somehow Diana had been fed information suggesting otherwise. "Tyler's doing great," I said firmly. "His teacher says he's one of her best students." Margaret made a small skeptical sound. "That's not what I heard. Didn't his mother mention concerns about his social development at the parent conference?" Another lie. Tyler's mother, Sarah, had never expressed any such concerns. In fact, she'd specifically praised Tyler's teachers and his progress at our last discussion about his education. Tyler looked up from his lonely table, hearing his name being discussed. His face showed the confusion of a child trying to understand why adults were saying things about him that weren't true. "Can I sit with everyone else?" Tyler asked quietly. "You're fine where you are, honey," Margaret replied without looking at him. "The grown-ups are having boring conversation anyway." Kevin decided this was the perfect moment to lecture me about fatherhood. "You know, Chet, being a single parent is tough, but you really need to step up and provide stability for Tyler. Kids need structure and consistency." I set down my fork carefully, fighting to keep my voice level. "Tyler has plenty of structure and consistency. He's happy, healthy, and well-adjusted." "I'm just saying," Kevin continued, "maybe you should consider what's best for Tyler's long-term development. Diana and I have talked about this, and we think he might benefit from spending more time in a traditional family environment." The implication was crystal clear. They wanted Tyler to spend less time with me and more time witnessing their supposedly superior family dynamic. Tyler's family environment is just fine," Robert interjected, his voice carrying a warning edge. Margaret raised her wine glass and called for attention. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, standing at the head of the table, "to Diana and Kevin for creating such a beautiful, perfect family. Your children are a joy to watch, and you should be proud of everything you've accomplished together." She paused, looking directly at Diana's children with genuine warmth and pride. Ashley, Brandon, and Caroline, you are the light of my life. Grandma loves you more than words can express. The toast ended without any mention of Tyler or me. We simply didn't exist in Margaret's vision of family worth celebrating. Tyler pushed his food around on his plate, no longer interested in eating. Patricia tried to include him in conversation from across the room, asking about his favorite subjects in school, but the physical distance made him feel even more isolated. Then, Margaret brought out her photo albums, spreading them across the coffee table in the living room. Page after page showed Diana's children at various family events, holidays, and milestones. Birthday parties, Easter egg hunts, summer picnics, school plays. Margaret had documented every moment of their lives with the devotion of a professional photographer. But as she flipped through hundreds of pictures spanning several years, something became obvious to everyone in the room. Tyler appeared in maybe a dozen photos total, and only when he happened to be standing near his cousins. There were no solo pictures of him, no special moments captured, no evidence that Margaret considered him worth documenting. "Look at this one from Ashley's ballet recital," Margaret said, pointing to a photo of Diana's daughter in a tutu. "And here's Brandon's first soccer game. Oh, and Caroline's preschool graduation ceremony." She had attended every important event in Diana's children's lives, but I couldn't remember the last time she'd shown up for anything involving Tyler. His school art show, his little league games, his birthday parties. Margaret always had an excuse for missing them. Diana's children had gathered around the coffee table to look at pictures of themselves giggling and pointing. "Tell them about the time we went to Disney World," Ashley urged. "Oh, yes," Margaret said, launching into a detailed story about the family vacation she'd paid for Diana's family to take to Florida. A vacation Tyler and I had never been invited to join, despite my son being the same age as Brandon and Caroline. Tyler slipped away from his corner table and stood near the kitchen doorway, watching but not participating. The expression on his face was one I'd never seen before, a kind of quiet acceptance that he simply didn't belong in this family's narrative. That's when Diana's children started the teasing. "Why didn't you get any presents, Tyler?" Ashley asked with the casual cruelty only children can display. "Were you bad this year?" "Yeah, maybe Santa doesn't know where you live," Brandon added, unwrapping another piece of candy from his stocking. Caroline, only 4 years old, looked confused. "Doesn't Tyler have a grandma too?" "He does," Ashley said matter-of-factly, "but she likes us better." The adults pretended not to hear the exchange, but I saw Tyler's shoulders slump in defeat. My 7-year-old son was learning that even children could sense the family hierarchy that placed him at the bottom. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Tyler, go get your jacket. We're leaving." "Where are you going?" Diana demanded. "Mom made dessert." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I no longer recognized. The person who'd shared my childhood, who'd built blanket forts with me and caught fireflies in mason jars, had become someone willing to watch a 7-year-old be emotionally destroyed for her own benefit. "We're going home," I said quietly. Tyler appeared with his jacket, and I helped him zip it up. His hands were small and cold, and he looked up at me with complete trust that I would take care of him. "Say goodbye to everyone, buddy," I told him. Tyler dutifully hugged his cousins and shook hands with Kevin. He hesitated in front of Margaret, uncertain how to say goodbye to a grandmother who'd made it clear he wasn't wanted. "Bye, Grandma," he whispered. Margaret bent down and gave him a quick, perfunctory hug. "Goodbye, Tyler. Be good for your daddy." As we walked toward the front door, I heard Margaret call after us. "Chet, don't be dramatic. Tyler can come back for dessert and games later." I turned around one last time, taking in the scene. Diana's children surrounded by mountains of toys and wrapping paper. Margaret and Diana already discussing plans for New Year's Eve. Douglas hiding behind his newspaper. Robert and Patricia looking uncomfortable but powerless to change anything. And in the corner near the kitchen, Tyler's abandoned place. Sitting at the card table, a stark reminder of how my family had chosen to treat my son on Christmas morning. "No," I said firmly, "we won't be coming back." But as I opened the front door, I heard Margaret make one final comment to Diana that she didn't think I could hear. "Good. Maybe now we can have a peaceful holiday." The drive home was quiet. Tyler stared out the window at houses decorated with Christmas lights, probably wondering why other families seemed so different from ours. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, my heart breaking at how small and sad he looked in his car seat. That's when I noticed something in my jacket pocket that I hadn't felt before. Reaching in, I pulled out a crumpled gift receipt that must have fallen from Margaret's purse when she'd hugged Tyler goodbye. The receipt was from a toy store dated 3 days ago. It showed the purchase and immediate return of a child's bicycle size appropriate for a 7-year-old boy. The return reason was listed as "no longer needed." Margaret had bought Tyler a Christmas present. She'd specifically shopped for a gift he would have loved. Then she'd deliberately returned it and used the money to buy additional presents for Diana's children. The cruelty wasn't passive or accidental. It was calculated, purposeful, and designed to cause maximum emotional damage to my son. As I folded the receipt and put it back in my pocket, I made a decision that would change everything. This was the last time anyone in my family would be allowed to hurt Tyler. No matter what it cost me, no matter what relationships I had to sacrifice, my son would never again be subjected to this kind of systematic emotional abuse. The war Margaret had started with her Christmas gift choices was about to become something much bigger than she ever imagined. I drove Tyler to his mother's house across town, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Sarah lived in a modest 2-story home in a family-friendly neighborhood where Christmas decorations sparkled from every front yard. Kids were outside testing new bicycles and playing with remote control cars, their laughter carrying across the snowy streets. Tyler sat quietly in his car seat, still processing what had happened. As we pulled into Sarah's driveway, he finally spoke. "Daddy, does Grandma not love me anymore?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I turned around to face him, seeing my own brown eyes reflected in his small face. How do you explain adult cruelty to a 7-year-old without destroying their faith and family bonds? "Grandma has some problems she needs to work on," I said carefully. "But that doesn't have anything to do with you, Tyler. You're an amazing kid, and anyone who can't see that is missing out." "But why did Ashley and Brandon get so many presents and I didn't get any?" I unbuckled my seatbelt and climbed into the back seat beside him. Tyler immediately crawled into my lap, and I held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and feeling his small heartbeat against my chest. "Sometimes grown-ups make really bad choices," I explained. "What happened today wasn't fair and it wasn't right. But I promise you, buddy, I will never let anyone treat you that way again." Sarah must have been watching for us because she opened the front door before we'd even gotten out of the car. At 30 years old, my ex-wife had built a good life for herself after our divorce. She worked as a nurse at the children's hospital downtown and had recently started dating a pediatrician who treated Tyler like his own son. "You're early," she said, then immediately noticed Tyler's subdued demeanor. "What happened?" I carried Tyler inside while explaining the day's events. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to anger to protective fury as she processed the story. "She did what?" Sarah asked, kneeling down to Tyler's level. "Tyler, honey, what did Grandma Margaret say to you?" "She said she forgot about me," Tyler answered quietly. "But Ashley got 12 presents, and Brandon got 12, and Caroline got 12. I counted them." Sarah stood up slowly, her face flushed with anger. "That woman has always been poison, but I never thought she'd take it out on a child." We settled Tyler in the living room with a movie and some of the cookies Sarah had baked for Christmas morning. Her house felt warm and welcoming in a way that made the contrast with my family even more stark. Christmas lights twinkled around the windows and a beautiful tree stood in the corner with thoughtfully chosen presents underneath. "I bought extra gifts just in case," Sarah said quietly as we watched Tyler start to relax. I had a feeling something like this might happen. You knew. I've known your mother for 9 years, Chet. She never liked me, and after our divorce, she made it clear she blamed me for breaking up what she considered a perfect family. I figured she'd eventually take that resentment out on Tyler. Sarah opened a closet and pulled out several wrapped presents. I got him the art supplies he wanted and a couple of books about dinosaurs. Nothing too big since he already has Christmas at both our houses, but enough so he knows he's loved. Watching Tyler's face light up as he unwrapped presents from his mother, I felt grateful that at least one parent in his life had her priorities straight. Sarah might not have been the right partner for me, but she was an excellent mother who would never use their child as a weapon in adult conflicts. There's something else you need to know, Sarah said as Tyler played with his new art set. Your mother called me 2 weeks ago asking about Tyler's custody arrangement. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in pursuing full custody. My blood went cold. What did you tell her? I told her it was none of her business and hung up. But Chet, she's actively trying to interfere with your parental rights. You need to document everything that happened today. After Tyler was settled and happy at Sarah's house, I drove back to my apartment across town. The building was quiet on Christmas evening, most residents either visiting family or hosting gatherings in their own homes. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor unit feeling emotionally drained but oddly determined. My apartment was small but comfortable with a dedicated corner set up for Tyler's visits. His drawings covered the refrigerator and his favorite books lined a shelf near the couch. This was his home too, regardless of what Margaret might think about single fathers. I made coffee and sat down at my computer, determined to research something that had been nagging at me all day. My grandfather had died 5 years ago, leaving behind a substantial trust fund specifically designated for his grandchildren's education and welfare. Margaret had always handled the financial details, claiming she understood the legal paperwork better than anyone else. But tonight, something about her casual mention of Diana's private school expenses and vacation funding made me wonder exactly how that trust was being managed. I pulled out the folder where I kept important documents and found the paperwork for my grandfather's estate. Reading through the dense legal language, I began to understand the trust's structure. The fund contained over $400,000 invested conservatively to grow over time. The money was specifically intended to ensure all grandchildren received equal educational opportunities and support. The more I read, the more questions arose. According to the documents, I was listed as the primary beneficiary and would become the trustee when I turned 30. I'd turned 30 2 years ago. I grabbed my phone and called Harold Pemberton, the estate attorney who'd handled my grandfather's will. His voicemail message said he was out of town for the holidays but would return calls on December 26th. Digging deeper into the paperwork, I found account statements that Margaret had been forwarding to me quarterly. The numbers showed steady growth in the fund's value, but the distribution records were vague. Educational expenses and approved family support were listed without specific details about which children had benefited or how much had been spent. If Diana's children had been attending expensive private schools for several years, those tuition payments would represent tens of thousands of dollars. If Tyler had received equal educational support, where were those records? I spent the next 3 hours creating a detailed timeline of every instance of favoritism I could remember. Diana's family trips that Tyler wasn't invited to join. Margaret's attendance at Diana's children's events versus her absence from Tyler's activities. Christmas and birthday gifts that showed obvious disparities in thought and expense. But the financial questions kept bothering me most. If my grandfather had intended equal treatment for all his grandchildren, why did Diana's family seem to be living well above their income level while I struggled to pay for Tyler's basic needs on my software engineer salary? At 11 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my grandfather's lawyer. "Chet, I got your voicemail," Harold Pemberton said. "I'm actually driving back from visiting my daughter in Colorado, so I thought I'd return your call tonight. What questions do you have about your grandfather's trust? Mr. Pemberton, I need to understand something about the trustee arrangements. The paperwork says I become the trustee at age 30, but my mother has been managing everything for the past 2 years. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Chet, you've been the legal trustee of that account since your 30th birthday. Your mother has no official authority over those funds. She should have transferred all account access to you 2 years ago. My heart started racing. What do you mean, no authority? She's been sending me quarterly statements and making distributions for educational expenses. Then she's been operating outside her legal authority. The trust documents are very clear. When the primary beneficiary reaches 30, they assume full control. Your mother was only the interim manager until you came of age. Harold's voice carried a note of concern. Chet, I think you need to come to my office first thing after the holidays. Bring all the statements and documentation your mother has provided. We may have a serious problem here. After ending the call, I sat in my quiet apartment trying to process what I'd learned. For 2 years, Margaret had been managing a trust fund. She had no legal right to control. She'd been making decisions about my son's financial future while actively working to undermine my relationship with him. The woman who'd humiliated Tyler on Christmas morning had also been stealing his educational opportunities. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about the trust distributions: Diana's children's private school tuition, their family vacations, their expensive summer camps. Meanwhile, Tyler attended public school and had never received any educational enrichment that I couldn't pay for myself. By midnight, I had a clear picture of what had been happening. Margaret had been systematically redirecting funds intended for Tyler toward Diana's family, all while maintaining the pretense that she was acting in everyone's best interests. The receipt for Tyler's returned Christmas bicycle sat on my desk like evidence in a crime scene. It represented something much bigger than a single cruel gesture. It was proof of a pattern of deliberate harm designed to benefit one grandchild at the expense of another. As I prepared for bed, I made a mental list of actions I would take after the holidays. Contact Harold Pemberton, review all account records, understand my legal options, and most importantly, ensure Tyler's future was protected from any further manipulation. Margaret thought she held all the power in our family dynamic. She was about to learn that financial documents don't lie and legal authority can't be faked forever. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of her control over my son's life. I was sitting in Harold Pemberton's law office by 9 o'clock on December 26th, armed with every document I'd been able to locate regarding my grandfather's trust fund. Harold's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the snow-covered Rocky Mountains in the distance. Harold Pemberton looked exactly like central casting would order for a trust attorney. Silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen every possible family financial drama over his 30-year career. He spread my documents across his mahogany conference table and began examining them with the focused attention of a forensic accountant. "This is worse than I suspected," Harold said after 20 minutes of review. "Your mother has been operating with forged documents." He showed me a transfer authorization bearing my signature, supposedly granting Margaret continued trustee authority past my 30th birthday. The signature looked convincing, but I had never signed any such document. She's been intercepting bank statements and creating her own quarterly reports. Harold continued comparing official bank records with the summaries Margaret had been sending me. "The actual account balance is nearly $60,000 less than what she's been reporting to you." My stomach dropped. $60,000? Where did it go? Harold pulled out a stack of legitimate bank statements that Margaret had apparently been hiding from me. Private school tuition for Diana's 3 children over the past 2 years. A family vacation to Europe last summer. Summer camp fees, music lessons, sports equipment, even clothing allowances. Your mother has been using Tyler's education fund as a personal ATM for Diana's family. The numbers were staggering. $47,000 in private school tuition that Diana should have been paying herself. $8,000 for the European vacation I'd never heard about. $3,000 for summer camps Tyler had never been invited to attend. "What's my legal recourse?" I asked. "Substantial wasimimos," Harold replied. "Your mother has committed embezzlement and fraud. You can pursue criminal charges if you choose. But more importantly, you can immediately resume control of the trust and restructure the beneficiary arrangements." He pulled out a different set of documents that I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather's original trust had provisions for removing beneficiaries who acted against the fund's intended purpose. Since Diana has been a willing participant in misusing Tyler's educational resources, you have grounds to exclude her children from future distributions. I can remove them from the trust entirely. The trust was established to provide equal educational opportunities for all grandchildren. If one family has been receiving significantly more than their fair share while actively excluding another grandchild, that constitutes a violation of the trust's fundamental purpose." Harold's expression was grim. "Your grandfather would be horrified to know his money was being used to create the very kind of family favoritism he was trying to prevent." Harold walked me through the process of resuming control. New bank account numbers, updated signatory authority, and most importantly, immediate freezing of all current access codes that Margaret had been using. "She'll be locked out of the accounts within an hour," Harold explained as we completed the paperwork. "Any attempt to access funds after that will trigger automatic fraud alerts." We spent another hour setting up proper educational accounts for Tyler, with safeguards, to ensure no one else could interfere with his financial future. The remaining trust funds would be invested conservatively to grow until Tyler needed them for college or other educational purposes. "There's one more thing you should know," Harold said as we concluded our meeting. "Your mother contacted my office 6 months ago requesting a competency evaluation for you." "A what?" "She claimed you were mentally unstable following your divorce and suggested you shouldn't have control over financial decisions affecting Tyler's welfare. She wanted to have you declared incompetent so she could maintain permanent control of the trust." My hands clenched into fists. "What happened with that request?" "I rejected it outright. You're a stable, employed single father with no history of mental health issues or financial irresponsibility. But Chet, her willingness to pursue such drastic measures shows how far she's willing to go to maintain control over your family." Harold handed me business cards for a family law attorney and a forensic accountant. "You may need additional legal support if your mother decides to escalate this conflict. Document everything, save all communications, and don't let her manipulate you into feeling guilty for protecting Tyler's interests." I left Harold's office feeling more empowered than I had in years. For the first time since my grandfather's death, Tyler's financial future was truly secure. More importantly, Margaret would never again be able to use money as a weapon against my son. But I also knew the real battle was just beginning. Margaret had built her identity around controlling family dynamics and financial resources. Taking that power away would force her to reveal exactly how vindictive she could become. I spent the afternoon at the bank, completing account transfers and updating all security protocols. Jennifer Walsh, the bank manager who'd worked with our family for years, looked troubled as she processed the changes. "Your mother was in here just last week, trying to set up automatic transfers for private school tuition," Jennifer mentioned as she finalized the paperwork. "She seemed surprised when I mentioned needing your authorization as the primary trustee." "What did she say?" "She claimed there had been some miscommunication about account authority. I told her I'd need to speak with you directly before processing any new automatic payments." Jennifer lowered her voice. "Between you and me, something about her demeanor seemed off. She was more aggressive than usual. As I drove home that evening, my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed my parents' home number, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By the time I reached my apartment, Margaret had called 7 times without leaving a message. I poured a glass of wine and sat down to plan my next steps. The account changes would become apparent to Margaret when she tried to access funds for Diana's January tuition payment. That confrontation was probably less than 24 hours away. But first, I needed to prepare Tyler for the possibility that Christmas morning's cruelty had been just the beginning of his grandmother's campaign against our family. At 7 years old, he deserved to understand why we might not be spending time with certain relatives for a while. I also needed to warn Sarah about potential escalation. If Margaret had been willing to suggest I was an incompetent father to a lawyer, she might try to involve other authorities in her efforts to undermine my custody rights. My phone rang again. This time it was Diana. "Chet, what the hell did you do?" Diana's voice was shrill with panic. "Mom tried to pay my kids' tuition today, and the school says the account is frozen." "I resumed control of grandfather's trust fund," I replied calmly. "The account was never supposed to be in Mom's name after I turned 30. You can't just cut off my children's education." "I'm not cutting off anything. I'm stopping the misuse of funds that were intended for all grandchildren equally. Diana, did you know Tyler has never received a single educational distribution from that trust?" There was a long pause. "That's not my responsibility. If you wanted Tyler to have private school tuition, you should have asked Mom to arrange it. I shouldn't have to ask for my son to receive equal treatment from his own family." I kept my voice level despite my rising anger. The trust was established to provide equal opportunities for all grandchildren. Tyler is entitled to the same educational support you've been giving your kids. "This is ridiculous," Diana snapped. "Mom manages those accounts better than you ever could. You're just being vindictive because of Christmas morning." Christmas morning was the final straw, not the cause. Margaret has been systematically excluding Tyler from family financial support while lavishing resources on your children. That ends now. Diana hung up without another word, but I knew she'd be calling Margaret immediately. The family crisis I'd set in motion was about to accelerate rapidly. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You're making a mistake that will affect Tyler's relationship with his grandparents forever." Margaret had moved beyond phone calls to anonymous threats. Her desperation was already starting to show, and I'd been in control of the trust for less than 8 hours. I poured another glass of wine and settled in to wait for the storm I knew was coming. But for the first time in years, I felt confident that I was fighting from a position of strength rather than constantly defending against attacks. Tyler's future was finally protected, and Margaret's ability to weaponize money against my family had been permanently eliminated. The real question was how far she'd be willing to go once she realized her financial manipulation days were over. My phone rang at 7:15 the next morning, jolting me awake from the first solid sleep I'd had in weeks. The caller ID showed my father's cell phone number, which was unusual, since Douglas rarely called anyone before noon. "Chet, I need to ask you something," Douglas said without preamble. His voice carried a strain I'd rarely heard before. "Do you know anything about problems with your mother's bank accounts?" I sat up in bed, immediately alert. "What kind of problems?" "She's asking me for $7,000 for some kind of emergency. Says her accounts are frozen and she needs cash to cover Diana's school payments." Douglas sounded confused and worried. "I don't have that kind of money just sitting around, and she won't explain what happened. Dad, I resumed control of grandfather's trust fund yesterday. Mom's been managing it illegally for the past 2 years. There was a long silence. When Douglas spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, illegally?" I explained the situation as gently as possible, knowing Douglas had spent decades avoiding family conflict by remaining willfully ignorant of Margaret's manipulations. But the financial evidence was too clear to deny or minimize. "She's been embezzling from Tyler's education fund," Douglas asked, his voice growing stronger with anger. "For 2 years. Dad Diana's kids have received over $50,000 in educational support while Tyler got nothing. The money was supposed to be distributed equally among all grandchildren. Douglas was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, "I had no idea. She told me Diana was paying for private school herself, that Kevin's business was doing really well." Kevin's business is fine, but they've been getting massive subsidies from Tyler's trust fund. Money that should have been split between all 4 grandchildren equally. "Jesus Christ," Douglas muttered. "No wonder she's been so defensive about family finances lately. She's been lying to me too." After ending the call with my father, I made coffee and prepared for what I knew would be a difficult day. Margaret would be discovering the extent of her lost control as various automatic payments failed and account access was denied. By 10 o'clock, Diana had called 3 times, each voicemail more frantic than the last. Her children's school was threatening to remove them from classes if January tuition wasn't paid within 48 hours. Her mortgage company had called about a bounced payment. Even her grocery shopping had been disrupted when her credit card was declined. I didn't return her calls. Diana was a 35-year-old adult who'd been living beyond her means by stealing from her nephew's educational fund. The consequences of that choice were hers to handle. At noon, Uncle Robert called with updates from his end of the family drama. "Your mother has been calling everyone she knows asking for loans," Robert reported. "She called my wife this morning crying about how you destroyed her financial stability and left her unable to support Diana's children." "What did Patricia tell her?" "Patricia told her the truth, that stealing from Tyler's education fund was inexcusable, and she deserved whatever legal consequences came her way." Robert's voice carried satisfaction. Then she hung up on Margaret. "How are other family members responding?" "Mixed reactions. Your cousin Linda thinks you're being too harsh, but most people are horrified once they understand what really happened. Nobody realized Tyler had been completely excluded from trust distributions." Robert paused before continuing. "Chet, there's something else you should know. Margaret has been telling people that Tyler isn't Douglas's biological grandson." My blood went cold. "What?" "She's been spreading rumors that Sarah had an affair during your marriage and Tyler might not be your son. It's completely fabricated nonsense, but she's been using it to justify treating him differently from Diana's kids." The cruelty was breathtaking. Margaret had been systematically destroying Tyler's place in the family by questioning his very right to belong to us. No wonder she'd made comments about his damaged genetics and referred to him as not worth the investment. "That's sick," I said. "Tyler looks exactly like me at that age. Anyone can see he's my son." Everyone knows it's lies, but Margaret's been desperate to justify her favoritism somehow. The biological parentage rumors were her way of making Diana's kids seem more legitimate as trust beneficiaries. As the day progressed, my phone continued ringing almost constantly. Margaret had called 43 times by 4 o'clock, never leaving voicemails, but clearly hoping I'd eventually answer out of frustration or guilt. Diana sent increasingly desperate text messages. Her children couldn't attend school if tuition wasn't paid. Kevin was furious about the mortgage situation. Her entire lifestyle was collapsing because it had been built on stolen money. At 5:30, Kevin himself called. "Chet, we need to work something out." Kevin said, his usual arrogance replaced by panic. "Diana's telling me you've cut off educational funding for our kids. That's not fair to punish children for adult conflicts." "Batch, the funding was never supposed to go exclusively to your children," I replied. "Tyler is entitled to equal educational support, and he's never received a dime." "But our kids are already enrolled in private school. You can't just yank funding in the middle of the school year." "You should have considered that before participating in embezzlement. The trust fund isn't your personal bank account, Kevin." "Look, maybe we can set up some kind of payment plan. Diana and I will pay back whatever extra we received, and you can restore the educational funding." "The extra you received is over $50,000. Can you write me a check today for that amount?" Kevin's silence was my answer. I didn't think so, I continued. Your family will need to make arrangements to pay your own expenses like every other family in America. The trust fund will be used for its intended purpose, providing equal educational opportunities for all grandchildren. At 7 o'clock, I was preparing dinner when someone started pounding on my apartment door. Looking through the peephole, I saw Margaret standing in the hallway, her hair disheveled and her face flushed with anger. "Open this door, Chet," she shouted loud enough for neighbors to hear. "We need to talk about this situation right now." I didn't open the door. Instead, I called the building's security office to report a disturbance. Margaret continued pounding and shouting for another 5 minutes before the security guard arrived and asked her to leave the premises. Through my window, I watched Margaret pace back and forth in the parking lot, talking animatedly on her cell phone. She looked unhinged, desperate, and completely out of control. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "You're destroying this family. Tyler will never forgive you for what you've done to his grandparents." The irony was stunning. Margaret was claiming I was destroying the family by stopping her from financially abusing my son. She'd spent years systematically excluding Tyler from family love and support, but now I was the villain for protecting his interests. By 9 o'clock, my phone showed 77 missed calls from Margaret's number. She'd called every 30 minutes or so throughout the day, each time hanging up when it went to voicemail. The persistence suggested someone on the edge of a complete emotional breakdown. At 10:15, Douglas called again. "Chet, your mother is having some kind of crisis," he said quietly. "She's been crying for hours, saying you've ruined her life and destroyed her relationship with her grandchildren." "Dad, she ruined her own life by stealing from Tyler's education fund." "I know that now, but she's talking about taking sleeping pills and never waking up. I'm scared she might hurt herself." The threat of self-harm was Margaret's ultimate manipulation tactic, designed to make me feel guilty enough to restore her financial control. But I also couldn't ignore the possibility that her desperation might lead to genuinely dangerous behavior. "Dad, if you're concerned about her safety, call 911 and ask for a welfare check. But I'm not going to be manipulated into giving her access to Tyler's money because she's threatening suicide." "I understand, but Chet, she's never been this desperate before. Losing control of those accounts has broken something inside her." After Douglas hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment processing the day's events. Margaret's world had collapsed in less than 48 hours once her financial manipulations were exposed. The woman who'd controlled family dynamics through money and favoritism was discovering what powerlessness felt like. But I felt no satisfaction in her suffering. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about protecting Tyler from further emotional and financial abuse, and ensuring his future wasn't sacrificed for Diana's family's comfort. My phone buzzed with one final text of the day. "The police are at your parents' house. Mom's been taken to the hospital for evaluation. I hope you're happy." The message was from Diana, and it carried all the venom she could pack into a few sentences. In her mind, I was responsible for Margaret's breakdown because I'd stopped enabling financial abuse. I poured a glass of wine and sat by my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere across town, Tyler was sleeping safely in his mother's house, probably unaware that his financial future had been secured and his grandmother's power to hurt him had been permanently eliminated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Margaret tried to rebuild some kind of control over the family dynamics. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt confident that I'd made the right choice in putting my son's well-being ahead of keeping peace with toxic relatives. The reckoning Margaret had triggered with her Christmas cruelty was far from over. But the balance of power had shifted permanently in Tyler's favor. The police report from Margaret's breakdown became part of a legal file that would protect Tyler for years to come. When officers arrived at my parents' house in response to Douglas's welfare call, they found Margaret in the garage, sitting in her car with the engine running. Douglas had discovered her there and called emergency services immediately. Margaret was hospitalized for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation, which gave our family time to process the previous week's revelations without her constant manipulation attempts. During those 3 days, several important conversations took place that reshaped our family dynamics permanently. Douglas called me on the second day of Margaret's hospitalization, his voice carrying a clarity I hadn't heard in decades. "Kraus, Chet, I owe you and Tyler an enormous apology," he began. "I've spent 30 years avoiding conflict with your mother by pretending I didn't see her favoritism toward Diana. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that kids are resilient, that it would all work out somehow. Dad, you don't need to—" Yes, I do need to say this. I watched her emotionally abuse Tyler on Christmas morning, and I said nothing. I watched her exclude him from family activities and financial support for years, and I said nothing. I was a coward who chose my own comfort over protecting my grandson. Douglas's voice broke slightly. When I found her in that garage, she was ranting about how Tyler didn't deserve the trust money because he wasn't really family. She said Diana's children were more important because they had better genetics and more potential. Chet, she was going to kill herself rather than face consequences for stealing from a 7-year-old boy. What happens now, Dad? Now I make different choices. Margaret has agreed to enter therapy as a condition of coming home. She's also agreed to have no contact with Tyler until she can demonstrate genuine remorse for her behavior. Douglas paused. And if she can't or won't change, then she'll be making those choices without me. The conversation I'd been hoping for my entire life had finally happened. Douglas was no longer willing to enable Margaret's toxic behavior, even if it meant ending their marriage. Harold Pemberton called later that week with updates on the legal situation. Margaret had signed documents acknowledging her unauthorized use of trust funds and agreeing to repay $20,000 over the next 5 years. Diana and Kevin were responsible for repaying the remaining stolen money through a separate agreement. Most importantly, Harold explained, Margaret has relinquished any future claims to trustee authority. Tyler's education fund is permanently protected from interference. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia had become Tyler's strongest advocates among the extended family. When I picked Tyler up from Sarah's house the following weekend, Robert was there with a late Christmas present, a beautiful wooden model train set he'd built himself in his workshop. "Every boy should have a train set," Robert told Tyler as they assembled the tracks together. "Your great-grandfather would have loved watching you play with this." Tyler spent the afternoon running trains around the elaborate track system Robert had designed, his earlier sadness about Christmas morning completely forgotten. Watching him laugh and play with genuine enthusiasm, I realized how much his confidence had improved once he was removed from Margaret's toxic influence. Sarah had made significant changes to Tyler's custody schedule as well. After learning about Margaret's attempts to undermine my parental rights, she'd adjusted arrangements to give Tyler more stability at both homes while protecting him from family drama. "Tyler doesn't need to be exposed to adult conflicts," Sarah explained, "but he also deserves to understand that what happened wasn't his fault. I've been talking with him about healthy family relationships versus toxic ones." Tyler had processed the Christmas incident better than any of us expected. Children are remarkably resilient when they have consistent support from reliable adults. With Margaret out of the picture and other family members stepping up to show him genuine love, Tyler began to flourish. Diana's family faced significant adjustments as they learned to live within their actual means. Kevin's business was successful enough to support their lifestyle, but they had to give up the luxury extras that Tyler's trust fund had been financing. Diana's children transferred to excellent public schools, and the family discovered they could be happy without constant financial overindulgence. Diana herself required more time to accept responsibility for her participation in the financial abuse. She'd been Margaret's willing accomplice, never questioning why Tyler received no educational support, while her children got everything. but watching her mother's complete breakdown had forced Diana to confront the toxicity she'd been enabling. 3 months after Christmas, Diana called to apologize. "Chet, I need to tell you how sorry I am about everything," she said, her voice carrying genuine remorse for the first time I could remember. "I was so focused on getting advantages for my kids that I never considered what we were taking away from Tyler." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "I want to make things right between us. Would you and Tyler like to come to Brandon's birthday party next month? I promise it'll be different this time." I accepted the invitation cautiously, but Tyler's experience at Brandon's party exceeded all expectations. Diana had made sure Tyler felt included in every activity, and her children had been coached about treating their cousin with kindness and respect. Margaret was notably absent, still working through therapy and supervised contact arrangements. For the first time in years, Tyler came home from a family gathering excited about his cousins and eager for the next family event. Margaret's therapy process took almost a year. She had to confront decades of manipulative behavior patterns, learn healthy communication skills, and most importantly, develop genuine empathy for the people she'd harmed. The process was difficult and sometimes unsuccessful, but gradually she began to acknowledge the damage her favoritism had caused. When Margaret was finally ready for supervised visits with Tyler, I established strict boundaries. Interactions took place in neutral locations with other family members present. Any signs of manipulation, favoritism, or inappropriate comments would result in immediate termination of contact. "Hello, Tyler," Margaret said during their first meeting at Uncle Robert's house. "I've missed you very much." Tyler responded politely but cautiously. At 8 years old now, he remembered how Margaret had treated him, but was willing to give her a chance to demonstrate change. "I brought you something." Margaret continued, pulling out a beautifully wrapped present. "It's not much, but I wanted you to know I was thinking about you." Inside was a book about dinosaurs, one of Tyler's favorite subjects. The gift was thoughtful and age-appropriate, showing that Margaret had actually listened when family members talked about Tyler's interests. Over the following months, Margaret's behavior toward Tyler remained consistently respectful and inclusive. She attended his baseball games, praised his school projects, and most importantly, never made comparisons between Tyler and Diana's children. The trust fund had grown significantly under proper management, ensuring Tyler would have excellent educational opportunities throughout his life. More importantly, he was surrounded by family members who genuinely loved and supported him without conditions or favoritism. Douglas had become the grandfather Tyler deserved, taking him fishing, teaching him woodworking skills, and providing the kind of steady male influence that builds confidence in young boys. Their relationship grew stronger as Douglas worked to make up for years of passive enablement. By Tyler's 9th birthday, our family had developed new traditions that emphasized equality and inclusion. Birthday celebrations involved thoughtful gifts chosen specifically for the birthday child's interests. Holiday gatherings included activities that brought everyone together rather than highlighting differences between families. Most importantly, Tyler learned that healthy families don't use love and support as weapons or rewards for good behavior. He learned that his value didn't depend on anyone else's opinion of his worthiness, and that some people's treatment of others said more about their own character than about the people they targeted. The trust fund, that had been a source of manipulation and abuse, became a tool for Tyler's empowerment. He used distributions for music lessons, summer enrichment programs, and eventually a college preparatory academy where he thrived academically and socially. Margaret never regained control over family finances, but she did rebuild relationships with Tyler and me through consistent demonstration of changed behavior. She learned to treat Tyler as an individual rather than as a reflection of his parents' choices, and she stopped using favoritism as a way to control family dynamics. The Christmas that had started with such cruelty ultimately became the catalyst for our family's healing. Tyler learned early in life that toxic behavior has consequences that healthy adults will protect children from abuse, and that standing up for what's right sometimes requires difficult choices. As Tyler grew older, he often mentioned that Christmas when discussing his own values and relationships. He'd learned that true family means supporting each other unconditionally, treating everyone with respect and fairness, and never using power or resources to manipulate or control others. The lesson that emerged from our family crisis was profound. Sometimes protecting the people you love requires setting boundaries with people who claim to love you but demonstrate otherwise through their actions. Love isn't about control or favoritism. It's about creating safe spaces where everyone can thrive. Tyler graduated high school with honors, earned a full scholarship to college, and developed into a confident young man who treats others with the kindness and respect he'd learned to expect for himself. The trust fund that Margaret had tried to steal became the foundation for Tyler's success. But more importantly, the experience taught him to value integrity over manipulation and authentic relationships over toxic family loyalty. Years later, when Tyler had children of his own, he made sure they understood their family's history, not to hold grudges, but to recognize healthy relationship patterns and never accept treatment that diminished their worth as human beings. The transformation that began with one Christmas morning's cruelty ultimately created a family legacy of respect, equality, and genuine love. Tyler broke the cycle of favoritism and manipulation that had defined previous generations, ensuring his own children would grow up knowing they were valued simply for being themselves. What started as the worst Christmas of Tyler's childhood became the foundation for the best family relationships of his adult life. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most painful experiences, teaching lessons that shape character and create wisdom that lasts for generations. I want to ask you something important. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love from family toxicity? How do you think children should be shielded from adult conflicts while still learning to recognize unhealthy relationship patterns? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help other families facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and standing up for what's right. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about setting healthy boundaries with toxic family members, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening to Tyler's story and mine. Remember that protecting the people you love sometimes requires courage, but the results can transform entire family legacies for the better. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the children in your lives.